Hello and welcome to It's Time. I'm so sad because my partner, Dr. Jen, is not here, but it is for great reasons. She is incredibly busy with some very exciting work that she'll share with you when we're next together. But we thought we'd take this opportunity. There are a couple of ideas that we've both really loved trading thoughts on, and we thought we'd take this opportunity today and then in a secondary episode to lay the foundation for a follow on series where we will do our duo podcast and do a deeper dive. So for today, I'm going to do one of the quicker episodes, sort of like the one Jen did when she was talking about causal versus correlative relationships in research. So this will be kind of a quicker episode, but I wanted to set the foundation for this practice deep dive that Jen and I will do together. And today we're going to talk about some pretty exciting research, which is the upside of aging. We spend a lot of time in our conversations talking about how to have higher health span, how to thrive in aging, how to enjoy your high half. But we've never really surfaced the research that says it's actually a great thing to age. And here are the reasons why. Here's the science behind it. And then in our follow-on episode, we'll talk about what are the practices that are daily and easy to do that you can deploy to make sure you access those benefits and amplify them. So this is going to be a quick hit top 10 list around the things that improve as we age. And I like to embrace that and celebrate it because whether we like it or not, we're aging. It's such a cliche, but the alternative is no fun. So we don't really want to go into this aging conversation thinking anti-aging because aging is living. So we're pro-living. That's what aging is. It's pro-living. With that kind of a context, let's jump into our top 10 like research-backed, science-backed benefits that you get by doing this aging thing. One is, and I think this is probably not a big surprise, but it's great to reinforce, there is greater emotional stability and well-being with age. Probably because it comes with that basic idea of, I don't really care what anybody thinks about me anymore. There is actually science behind this. There are 3 or 4 studies that are pretty broad and well known. I think it's Dr. Laura Carson's socio-emotional selective theory study, which looks at how people actually prioritize meaningful goals and well-being as they age versus some of the short-term objectives and kind of external perspectives. So that's kind of a fun one to just remember that overall well-being improves with aging and just embrace that. Related to it is the second big benefit. So that's number 2 of 10 is that you get enhanced wisdom and perspective. And of course we should, right? Should be the payoff of experience. But the science really says that older adults tend to outperform younger adults in things that are wisdom related tasks, like thinking about life dilemmas or how to think broadly about solutions and surfacing solutions. And so the research was a series of tests around older adults versus younger adults and trying to see how quickly they could come to a successful solution by drawing upon that life experience. So the knocks and the bumps in life result in this second benefit of we actually do have measurable better performance in things that are wisdom based and solution filtering and kind of triaging to get to the best answer most effectively and the most high impact best answer when they looked at some of those wisdom studies. So that's a win. The second one was around stronger emotional regulation. So the highs and lows of our emotional lives tend to kind of settle down as we get older. And I think that's related to the first benefit and a little bit of we just don't care about every single bump in the road and attach as much meaning and challenge to it as we did maybe in our 20s or 30s. So this overall sense of being able to regulate your emotions and sort of sit with the outcomes and ride through because we've seen, right, time and time again, things go in waves and what looks bad now may end up being wonderful. And so you bring that kind of a perspective when you're hitting bumps on the road now. The studies around that were kind of related to this idea of positivity effect and showed that older adults have an attention bias towards down regulating their negative emotions. So I feel like that's got to be a win, is that we get this muscle memory to not attach as much importance to things that are a challenge, and we down regulate some of the stressors and some of the reactivity that we might have had earlier in our life. And the other study that was kind of cool was there was this neuroimaging work done on older adults and showed that they use their prefrontal regions to a greater degree and more effectively than younger adults. So, there's one on the board for putting some decades on the books. The fourth one of our 10 wins, science-backed wins for aging, is around social relationships. And what a good news story this is, because we all know how important community is. So the benefit really is that relationships for older adults tend to become more focused on positive interactions. So it's like you filter your relationships and your friends for ones that are really feeding and nourishing you. And then they become deeper and really more stable, less conflict and less transactional. Some of the research with this was around showing that with age, your social networks tend to shrink a little bit, but they become more emotionally satisfying. And I think to some degree, we all feel that. So we have little pods of people in life, and you get tighter around those pods and tend to attach your time investments to the people in the pods that are nourishing. So that's got to be a win also. The fifth big, here's something that's different when you're older than when you're younger. I think this idea got a lot of attention with Arthur Brooks' work when he talked about the 7 strengths of being an older adult, but he called attention to this idea, this research around the difference between 2 types of intelligence. One type is called fluid intelligence, and that tends to be a strength in younger adults, so up until the age of 40. That's intelligence that's related to fact acquisition, speed of problem solving within that fact base, deep learning on new languages, calculations, things like that are in the fluid intelligence range. And then there's the second kind of intelligence called crystallized intelligence, which is more about synthesis and implications and leadership and coaching skills. And so it seems a little obvious when you put the two together that, yeah, as you get older, that wisdom strength can translate into being able to synthesize information and then relay it or share it more effectively. So people tend to peak in in every kind of career. I think the research that Arthur Brooks shared showed whether you were a musician or an athlete or a statistician or an investor, that your peak in that skill demonstrability tended to be between the ages of like 42 and 58, 60. But then after that, your ability to coach or to teach or to synthesize great research and come up with implications that are far reaching and perhaps not so obvious in the first wave of that synthesis, that peaks as you get older. So that's that crystallized intelligence. And that's kind of reaffirming as you think about how you're spending your time as we get older. Like, what are the things to kind of to focus on that would be natural alignment with that increased intelligence? And we'll get into some of the practical how-tos in that follow-on episode. But that research is as far back as the 1960s, the crystallized intelligence, which is knowledge and experience, versus fluid intelligence, which is more like processing speed. That research was started in the 50s and 60s and then really kind of came to life and got bigger awareness in some of the recent research around aging that's come across since it's 2010. I think there's some other interesting research that was in 2015 called large scale peak vocabulary research, which is around acquiring vocabulary and then deploying vocabulary. People who were later in their 60s and 70s, they had a breadth of vocabulary, but they were able to execute that vocabulary more efficiently than younger adults, which is kind of cool. So those are the first 5 of our 10. The 6th benefit of aging is around this increased behavior around kindness or altruism or pro-social behavior. And that's not a big surprise, right? As we get older, we think a lot about purpose and meaning. There's a lot of opportunity to think about, what do we want to give back? How do we want to have an impact on this world? And so that translates into increased generosity, increased volunteering, and increased service, which is a good match for the amount of time people might have to go into those kinds of activities as we get older. So a couple of studies around that found that older adults have higher levels of altruism and civic engagement in their day-to-day activities, but that they are also more likely to engage in just pro-social behaviors like mentoring or like explicit kindness and interactions, because they've been reflective on their life experience. So, maybe we don't get old and crotchety. Maybe most of us actually have a chance to get old and kind. The 7th one is a movement away from being concerned about social comparison, which has got to be a relief. And I wonder if it'll hold true in our world with social media, as older adults are using social media as well. But to date, older adults in this research show that they care less about trying to keep up with others and more about finding what is their authenticity and their authentic living choices, which is a great reinforcer for genuine happiness and feeling satisfaction in life. It could be a little bit about why that U curve of happiness continues to go up as we get older, is that we're filtering for the things that are authentically fit for our own nature and our own soul, and then investing our time and energy in those. Some of the research around that was around talking with older adults and thinking about span of control and living within your lifespan of control as you get older. Aging people see a shift from competition and comparison and look more towards internal alignment with their authentic selves. So that feels like a little bit of an exhale to go into that behavior mode. The eighth research backed strength or benefit that comes from aging is this idea of post traumatic growth or resilience. So the net is we've all been through a lot as we go through these decades. And that's the benefit of having survived these decades, is that those are lessons learned and they are resilience builders. So the research around that translates into being able to navigate daily stressors with less actual stress reaction in the body, because you've been through so much that your body understands it's okay, and your mind sends the signal that it's okay, and kind of reduces the cortisol reaction or the stressor reactions in your neurochemistry. It's kind of also connected to a lot of the research around older adults and their reinvigoration or re-curiosity around spirituality and meaning making, and connecting the bigger picture meaning making conversations to a day-to-day resilience and ability to navigate the day-to-day. So that's, inspiring to know that some of the traffic on the road, or irritation with your cable going out or your Xfinity going out or your Wi-Fi going out, is not necessarily as painful as it might have been in your 30s or 40s. The ninth one is around this real explicit positivity bias, which was referenced in some of the earlier strengths, but translating that into meaning making. Most older adults in these studies were able to remember positive information with higher capacity than the negative information. It's like they shed the negative information and attach to the positive information. This was a study that was Mather and Cardenson who did this in 2005. I mean, it's not even that recent a study, but they were able to translate, there was this positivity effect in memory, and older adults attached their attention to the positive things and consequences in their day to day, and in their memory making would go back to the positive experiences to amplify. So it's, not an inauthentic positivity, but it's a decision to attach your time and memory making to things that were genuinely joyful or positive in your history, and then using that as a filter for how older adults tend to go through their day to day. And again, it's not a huge shocker that we get focused on meaning making as we get more decades. And so because we're focused on meaning making, most older adults tend to look at things and try to find the meaning and the positive outcome that's associated with that activity, because they're looking for that positivity or that happiness in that meaning making. So there's a lot of kind of just the mindset or the outlook effects that are good with age. I think one of the things that was also interesting, this 10th benefit, was there might actually be some biological upsides to aging, which, that was a surprise to me. I wasn't really thinking there was biological upside to aging. That's always more what we talk about, is how to blunt some of the biology or some of the physiology of aging so that we have more energy, or we have better bones, or we have better skeletal muscle, or we sleep better. And so we talk a lot as we're dialoguing on our show here about how do we use movement, how do we use mindset, how do we use sleep and nourishment to really keep that biological impact of aging manageable, so we enjoy the extra decades. But this research is explicitly around what gets better. And so there are apparently some cellular systems and processes that actually slowed in late aging, potentially reduce risks for certain kinds of cancers or certain kinds of dementia and cognitive decline. So we'll get into that in a little more detail in our follow-on series on this, but ending that in a little bit of a high note, that not everything in the physiology of aging is necessarily horrific. So there's some things that can be getting better, and then we can kind of embrace those and see how to expand those and expand that impact on how we feel in our day-to-day. So that's a very quick download and outline on some of the practices that we'll come back to tied to each one of those 10 benefits of aging. But mostly it's just an invitation to embrace that each day is an extra day, and embrace that each day means we're a day older. That doesn't mean we're trying to reverse the clock always, or we're trying to go back to a certain point in time. We're in this moment in time, and we're continuing to move forward in this moment in time. And there are 10 explicit benefits to the fact that we're getting older every day. So cheers to that. And we can't wait to be back together again with Dr. Jen. Thank you so much for spending your time with us here today. If you liked what you heard and you got some tips on how to live better right now and for the long haul, please help us reach more midlife women. Please share and rate and like this show. And we can't wait to continue the dialogue with you on our next episode. Until then, thank you. It's time.